Welcome to Belfast, Wales. Today's guest is Lionel Friedberg. Lionel is an Emmy Award-winning film and TV producer and writer. Lionel grew up in South Africa. He began his career in a TV station in Northern Rhodesia, which is now Zambia, in 1961. He has worked as a director of photography on 18 feature films. He's wrote and produced and directed for National Geographic, Discovery Channel, PBS, A&E, and the History Channel. Lionel is also a New York Times bestselling author. His new book, Forever in My Veins, How Film Led Me to the Mysterious World of the African Salmon, which is available now, am I correct in saying?
Yes, it's available right now. Deliveries won't start till the end of the month, but it's available as of now, yes.
And Lionel is based in Los Angeles, California. So thank you, Lionel, for coming on, and I appreciate your time.
A pleasure, Jonathan. Good to meet you, and I'm very happy to be here.
That's great. Lionel, as I mentioned, you grew up in South Africa. What was that like? Just to start us off, what was it like growing up in South Africa? I know I was obviously during the time of apartheid as well.
Yes. My memories of it are still very, very vivid, and I do talk about this in the book. In fact, that was the beginning of my journey, so to speak, and it's the beginning of the process which became the glue that connects all these aspects of my life. Because as a child, I obviously witnessed the horrors and the nastiness of the apartheid system in practice. We grew up in that. I went to school and everything was divided. The entire world around you, whether it was a beach or a bank or whatever it may have been, a white person went in one door and a black person went in the other door, and the twain never met. It was a vicious, horrible system. And as a child, I remember very vividly, walking down the road or whatever. I grew up in the Johannesburg area, but in a number of towns, a number of industrial towns and cities around the Johannesburg area. And very often as a kid, growing up, either going to school or even before that, you would see a black nanny wheeling what you would call a pram, with a baby in it, a white baby inside, or just a black person walking on the sidewalk of a road, and a police van would arrive. And the police would get out and ask for their papers. If they didn't have permission to be in that area, they would be thrown into that van, locked up, and they would either have to be bailed out by their employer, or they were sent back to what were known as Bantustans. Bantustans were the tribal areas where they originally came from, or their tribal group. Even if they were born in the city, they would be sent back to their tribal area. If they were a Zulu, they would be sent back to Zululand. If they were a Sotho, they were sent back to that area, and so on. There are 11 major tribal groups in South Africa, and there are 11 official languages in South Africa today as a result of that. Yeah. Most people, of course, speak English, but when I grew up, there were only 2 official languages, and that was English and Afrikaans. And Afrikaans was what we call the language of the oppressor. The Afrikaans community were the people in power at the time, and so everyone had to learn Afrikaans. We all did, and in actual fact, there is a beauty to Afrikaans in its own way. It's kind of like German. It stems from Dutch and German. And I'm glad I did learn it, because as a result of that, I can speak a little bit of Dutch and I can understand German. But English is the spoken language. So I witnessed a lot of horrible things as a child, and I would try to ask my parents. I was an only child, and I would say to my mom and dad at night, I say, I saw so-and-so being thrown into a van today and they get driven off. What happened to them? What did they do? They didn't do anything wrong. And my parents would always say, don't even discuss it. Don't talk about it. Because you were forbidden to discuss these things. It was an entrenched system that carried quite a price if you were not on the right-hand side of the law, because it was entrenched. It was entrenched in the laws of the country. Yeah. And it only began to wane probably towards around about the early 80s. It began to slowly begin to dissipate because the writing was clearly on the wall. I left South Africa in 1986 to come and live in the States, although I had emigrated much earlier than that, and I won't bore your viewers with all of that, but it's all in the book. But we officially left, my family and I, in 1986, and by then it was, you could see it was going to end. And the writing was on the wall for the Afrikaans, the government in power at the time, under a dreadful man by the name of P.W. Botha. He was eventually replaced by someone else who, F.W. de Klerk, who eventually did away with all of this. So by the time I got here to live in California, apartheid started becoming history, and it wasn't long after I arrived when they released Nelson Mandela from prison on Robben Island, and now it's a different country. Of course, it is a democratic country. Unfortunately, a lot of crime at the moment in South Africa, and I think that is a direct result of unemployment. Yeah. And that is probably a direct result also of the apartheid system, because the black community was never prepared to be an integral part of the sophisticated level of society. Even the educational system was designed in such a way to keep them down. Yeah. They would be, they would be cleaners and doormen and whatever else, but never really trained to become professionals. And it was designed that way. And of course, there was the mining industry and the gold mining industry and the platinum industry. So, this was a good source of labor for the government and for industry at the time. So it was a dreadful system in which to grow up. And fortunately, as a child, if I may jump ahead a little bit, I was exposed to an interesting situation once. We were living in a small town called Kempton Park, which is named after Kempton Park in the UK. But Kempton Park is just to the southeast of Johannesburg, and that is where the major international airport is now. So that's the reason why Kempton Park exists. And my father had a little business there. And we had a maid who worked for us. Everybody had a maid. It was just like colonial times. Everyone had a maid, and or a servant at home. And one day, and I always got along very well with my nannies. We used to my nannies, right? And I must have been about 6 years old. I think it was her day off, and she took me for a walk, and she took me to see a friend of hers down the road at another house where there was another maid working, and all the servants had little rooms in the backyard of the house, of the property. A little tiny little shack at the back end of the garden, way at the back of the garage. And they had their own little bathroom, which was really nothing more than a pit toilet and a cold shower. Yeah. And, she took me to see a friend of hers there. And when we got there, there was a line of people outside the door of her friend's room. And I said to her, "Why are they here?" And she said to me, "Well, because," and she named the name of her friend. I forget what her name was, but she said, "Because she's a doctor." I thought, well, she's a doctor. What do you mean? And she said, "Well, I will show you." So when it came our time to go inside, this queue of people, eventually people went in, and 5 or 10 minutes later, they'd come out carrying little satchels or little jars of powders and herbs and things. And eventually we went into her room. And I looked around this room, and then my nanny said, "She'll explain to you what is here." And the woman said to me, "Yes, I am a doctor. I got trained back in the tribal area before I came to the city and became a servant, but I'm trained to be a sangoma." And a sangoma is the South African word for traditional herbalist or shaman, which includes divination, communication with the spirits, dispensing herbs, being a healer, all those things. That's the sort of umbrella, label, sangoma, for someone who does all of those things. And she explained that in her room, she had all these little bottles and jars and canisters of little herbs and twigs and bottles and whatever else. And she would dispense things for people who were ill, because black servants feared the white doctors because they didn't really know what they were going to get in for. If they were sick, they'd rather go to a sangoma than to a white doctor or a clinic. And so she explained that she would dispense medication for these people. Medication, by the way, there's a lovely word. It's a Zulu word, muti. And it was even used in white society. You know, if you had a bad tummy or you weren't feeling terribly well, your mother would say, you take your muti today and you'll get better, you know. And she also showed on the floor of her room with this little grass mat. And on this mat was a little bag in which there were bones and stones. And those were the tools that she used to communicate with the spirits. Right. You know, the throwing of the bones. So I was exposed to this as a child. I didn't understand anything about it. I didn't know what was going on. But then the surprising thing is, as I explain in the book, many, many years later, after my parents left South Africa, primarily because of apartheid, my father took a job running a small business on the copper belt, which is a copper mining area in what was then called Northern Rhodesia, just to the south of the Congo border. And we moved up there. I had finished my education and, you know, I had gone up there with them. My mother said, stay in South Africa, go to university, get yourself a degree. But I didn't want to do that because all my life I wanted to make films. And I was making 8mm films for those who remember back to the days when we still used celluloid and film. 8mm was the medium that you use as an amateur, you know, unlike video cameras today. Or this, you know, is your camera. Those days it would be an 8mm camera. And I used to make movies about my friends' birthday parties, you know, and sports events at schools and whatever else, because I fell in love with the movies when I was about probably 5 or 6 years old. My mother took me to see the movies and I loved them. And that's what I wanted to do. So when they moved to Northern Rhodesia, I said, I'm not going to university to waste my time. I just want to become a movie maker. And I had my favorite movies. And of course, they were King Solomon's Mines, The African Queen, all those wonderful classic Hollywood movies about the dark continent. And so I thought, here's a great opportunity for me to be able to do that. And I didn't realize by the time I arrived up in Northern Rhodesia that there was nothing like that up there at all until one day, out of the blue, it was like manna from heaven. Just shortly after I arrived in Northern Rhodesia, a British company decided to set up a television service to provide entertainment for the copper miners who earned a lot of money those days. Copper had an enormous price those days. And so these miners had a lot of spare cash. White miners, particularly, I'm talking about now, not so much the black miners. And, you know, everybody had a trailer or a caravan or a boat in their driveway, because they had all this money, but there was no way of spending it, because basically this was in the middle of the African bush. And thank goodness, just a few months after I arrived, there was this advertisement in the local paper that this television station was going to open. And I thought, God has heard my prayers. And I knocked on the door and they gave me a job. And I still helped them, you know, weld all the cables together and lay. They were still building the station. And that's how my career began. And as I tell it in the book, after a few years, Northern Rhodesia was given its independence by Britain because it was the end of the British Empire. All the colonies were given their independence, and Northern Rhodesia was then slated to become independent on the 24th of October, 1964. And I was still working for the station at that point. And when that happened, we got a letter from the soon-to-be black government to say, all you white guys working for RTV, it was that Rhodesia television, because of Northern Rhodesia, you got to get out, you got to leave, because you have to be replaced by local indigenous people, which was totally understandable, you know, and who was to argue with that? But I was going to lose my job, as was everyone else. And I told this to, we had a guy working for us at home. He was a member of the Bemba tribe. David Fury was his name. I'll never forget David. He and I used to talk about photography a lot. And I went home and I said, David, you know, I've been told to leave the station and I don't know what to do with my life. You know, and he was our servant and he said, do not worry, I will take you to someone and she may help you to make up your mind. Because I didn't want to go back to South Africa. And that's how the journey began. And that's where the book begins, because I went to see this in Zambia. They don't call them sangomas. They call them ngangas.
Ngangas. Okay.
Yes. And she was a little withered. She was an albino, actually, which means that there was a problem with the pigment of her skin. So she had a pale color rather than black. Yeah. And, David took me to see her. Well, we got there by bouncing along this dirt road in my little blue VW Beetle. And we got to this old woman's hut, virtually on the outskirts of the town of Ndola, where I was living. And she didn't speak any English, but I had David with me. And she threw the bones, and she told me about my life and what was to do. And that was the beginning of this unbelievable adventure, which is what I talk about in the book, because that is the glue that holds all the stories together. Everything that happened in my life for the next 60 years, everything came to pass that she told me about.
When you met the Nganga, is that correct?
Yes. Right.
Well, just before we go into, I know she gave a series of predictions. What are you able to give a bit more information on that? Like what was her role? I take it she was the healer for the village.
She lived in a rural area where there were other settlements in the area, and of course people used to come from town, I'm quite sure, to see her as well, although on that particular day she didn't have any other so-called clients, but there were obviously other people who saw her, because apparently David told me that she was a very well-known person, and I'm not surprised, because what she told me, she spoke no English, and she once the process is really interesting. She said, sit down, which we did. And she gave me this little bag. And in this bag were all of these little pebbles and stones and bones and other little accoutrements that she used, which was her toolkit to connect her with the ancestors. Now, the African paradigm about healing or God or religion or any of those things is you work through the ancestors. The ancestors are your channel to the higher realms. And it's absolutely fascinating, because that's how it works throughout Southern Africa. I've met many, many tribes, filmed among many, many other tribes, and that is always the channel that one uses in order to see the future, in order to heal, in order to find answers to your questions or whatever it is that you have, is you work through the ancestors. And the tools that these people use are these bones. And the idea is you shake the bones in the bag, you throw them on this little grass mat, and the way they fall is dictated by the ancestors. The ancestors supposedly manipulate the way these items fall on the grass mat. And then this person who is the healer, the Sangoma or the Nganga, reads the pattern and foretells or gets the answers to whatever your question is, or diagnoses your illness by what the bones tell him or her. Okay. And, she just rattled off stuff, it was this floodgate of stuff that she told me. And the first thing that she said to David was, as she began reading, she looked at the bones like this, and suddenly she pulled back and she said, "Oh, what are these bright lights? I can't see anything." And she knew nothing about my career. She knew nothing about what I was doing. But when she said that, I knew that this woman wasn't lying. She said, "I can't see anything. All I can see are bright lights." Well, I was working in television. And what do you have in a television studio? You have bright lights.
Bright lights, yeah.
And she saw that, When she told me that, I was all ears. I listened to every word she said. And of course, David was translating whatever she was saying. And, she just kept with these, telling me things endlessly. And it was an amazing experience. We must have been there for about an hour and a half while she just rattled off things, and all of those predictions. She didn't describe them exactly as they turned out, because she didn't always understand what she was seeing. Like, for example, she said to David, "He will cross the great water. He will move across to another place, far, far didn't use the word north, but in that direction, pointing to the north. He will cross the great water in that direction," meaning he will go to the northern hemisphere by crossing the ocean. That's what it turned out to be eventually. And of course, that came to pass, because I eventually did emigrate to Canada. And she said to me, she said a lot of things. Once one of the little predictions she made was, but be very careful of the big water, because it will try to kill you.
Okay.
And many, many, many years later, and I didn't understand what any of this was about until the events occurred. And I had made notes, but of course I had made mental notes of everything this woman told, because it was a life-changing experience. And I was working on, I did a number of shows as a documentary filmmaker at sea. And once I was on a research vessel that almost capsized in the South Atlantic. And, she said to me again, she said, the water will try to kill you. And we nearly drowned. The ship nearly capsized. I was on a little fishing boat. I was making a film for BP Oil on a big fishing factory ship off the coast of Angola. And the only way we could get back to land was to take a trip on one of these little trawlers from the major ship. And we got caught in the storm. Right. And, we nearly died at sea. And, she saw all of these by telling me the great water will try to kill you. Well, that's what she saw. I don't think she understood what she was seeing. And I didn't understood what they were until the events actually took place. And, obviously I would then suddenly realize, oh my God, that's what she saw, after they happened. And time and time again.
After that meeting with her, two questions with that. Did you ever meet her again? And what was the first kind of event that took place? You kind of went, oh, that's what she said.
I think the first thing that I realized was one night traveling on what was called the S.A. Vaal. It was a passenger liner that was part of the Union Castle Saf Marine shipping line, which used to run the Royal Mail service between the UK and South Africa. And when I emigrated to Canada in 1966, after I lost my job in television, I had to go back to South Africa. What else was I to do? So I got a job in the film industry, which was wonderful. But I always wanted to work in Hollywood. I always wanted to get to North America. I always wanted to make, major feature films. I emigrated to Canada in 1966. And I was standing on the deck of the S.A. Vaal one night, just before we crossed the equator, every night I used to watch the Southern Cross get lower and lower and lower in the sky. And I knew I was crossing to another hemisphere of the planet. And it was real, because every night you could see the star system was getting lower and lower in the rear of the vessel, down towards the horizon. And one night I was standing up on the deck outside, just watching the stars and listening to the sea. And I suddenly realized, God, the woman foresaw this. I am crossing the big water to the north. She was right. That's the first time. And that happened only like 2 years after she told me that. That was the first thing.
Yeah.
That came to pass.
And did you ever meet her again? Did your paths ever cross again, or
never again? She's lived with me ever since that time, and of course all of her predictions. But I never met her again. Okay. And David and I, the servant that we had working for us, who took me to see her, he and I maintained a correspondence for a long, long time, until, as things happen, eventually we lost touch with one another. And I so often wonder what has happened to David today. He would have been my age, if he's still alive. I don't know.
Yeah. And I know she mentioned one of the predictions that she warned you about was that you would nearly be killed or nearly lose your life to a great beast.
Yes.
Can you tell us a bit more about that prediction?
Absolutely. That was probably the next event that made me realize that this woman had foreseen something that was actually that really did happen. In 1967, I lived in Canada. I came to North America. I lived in Canada, worked for the National Film Board, and spent some time in Los Angeles. But my father was not well, and I went back to Africa. They were still living in what was then the Republic of Zambia. It had become independent. And so I went back because my mother would have been alone if anything had happened to my father. And I wanted to make sure that she was okay and, obviously get her back to South Africa because that's where she was born. and so that she could retire there. So I went back to Africa. And when I did go back to South Africa, I was working in the film industry. And one day I get a telephone call from a Swedish producer who was who was working there at the time. And he said, yeah, I've just been contacted by a company in Los Angeles, and their clients are coming out to Mozambique, which is right next door to South Africa on the eastern side of South Africa. They're coming to Mozambique on a hunting safari, and they want a film made about that. Are you interested in going to shoot that? And I have always been an absolute anti-hunting person. I can't bear the thought of killing wildlife for fun. I don't know what it's all about. It makes no sense to me at all. Where is the fun in killing wild animals? And so I thought, you better, if you want to find out what gives people the kicks to do this, you better go along with them and find out what makes it all work. Why do they like doing this awful stuff? Go and make the movie. Yeah. I discussed it with a few friends of mine, and they said, yeah, go. You'll hate it. You'll probably have a terrible time, but go and do it. And so I did. I took the job. And it was very interesting because the man who led the safari was a very, very nice guy whose name was Arthur Millen. And he was the CEO of a major toy company based here in the Los Angeles area. And they had made a fortune out of marketing the hula hoop. Now, in the 50s, the hula hoop was a craze that took the world by storm. And Arthur, or Spud as his nickname was, made millions out of the hula hoop. But then he made a fortune out of another toy that he developed called the frisbee. You know, you throw the frisbee.
Yes, yeah.
So Spud was an extremely wealthy guy.
Yeah.
And he and two of his buddies here from Los Angeles, one was a stockbroker, I won't mention any names, they may still be around, and the other one was a lawyer. Yeah. They went out with him to Mozambique to an enormous hunting concession in the middle of the country to go and kill wild animals for fun. Yeah. And anyway, I met them in a town called Beira, which is the biggest city in Mozambique, to the northern part of the country. I met them there. They flew in on a Portuguese TAP jet, Boeing 707. And when they were the only three people in first class, and it was a tiny little airport, but the flight came directly from Lisbon. And as their goods, their luggage and stuff was being unloaded from the aircraft, it never stopped because there were crates of weapons and ammunition, and it was like fighting a war. Yeah. You know. But they were three really wonderful guys. But I just didn't understand, you know, what it was all about. What drew them to this?
Did they ever explain to you? Did they ever?
We drank a lot of vodka on that trip, and I tried to find out, but they said, listen, you're a softie, you know. People have been killing animals since time immemorial. Nothing's changed. I didn't buy into any of that. But to get to your answer to your question was, everybody had a license to kill at least one elephant. And so it came the time for one of these other guys, not Spud, but one of the other guys to shoot his elephant. The trackers found a herd, and we began to track them in our open. Those days there were two vehicles that you used in Africa. It was the Land Rover from the UK, or it was the new from Japan, the Toyota, which was a very, very good four-wheel drive open vehicle like a Land Rover those days. And, you know, and then there was a big truck, a big Bedford truck behind, which would pick up the carcasses and the horns and the whatever else that they'd murdered and take them back to base camp, you know, and have them skinned and whatever else for shipment back home. So, you know, we were traveling along in these open Land Rovers, and the tracker found elephant spoor, you know, the footprints, and said, there is a herd, we'll follow them. And we did. But the elephants obviously knew that we were after them, because, you know, they were used to the fact that there were hunters around with guns. And eventually we had to leave the Land Rover and go on foot. until sundown, we still hadn't got to the herd, and so we had to spend the night in the bush. And it was the 3 hunters and the 2 white guide hunters and the trackers and myself, maybe, I don't know, probably a dozen of us. And we decided we'll just sleep in the bush tonight and carry on looking for them in the morning, or go back to the vehicles, which was then miles away. Mm-hmm. And that night we were sitting, and there was no moon. It was a pitch black, dark night. And the main white hunter, the guide, Wally, said, "Don't move. We are surrounded by elephants." The herd had come back to us and had surrounded us.
Right.
And he said, all I could hear was my heart thumping, and you could hear the elephants, the rumble of their heartbeat, and there was a sound of their ears to, as they around us, all around us. They could have killed us, and they probably were warning us, leave us alone. Because Wally whispered to me, in the morning, by the time the sun came up, the herd had left, and Wally said, they came to warn us. They could have killed us last night, and they didn't. And that's how smart these guys are. That's how clever the elephants are.
It's like a demonstration of power, almost, isn't it?
It was almost like a warning. Leave us alone. And maybe I'm reading the wrong things into it, and turning animals into some sort of anthropomorphic kind of beings, but they're intelligent beings. I think they came to warn us. Anyway, they left us alone, but the hunter wanted to kill his elephant, and eventually we did find the herd. And the white hunter had pointed out to this guy, the American, which animal he should try and shoot. Now, it was a bull that was standing slightly to the edge of the herd, so he had obviously lost his place as the main, hunter, the main male in the group, because of his age probably, and but he did have fairly large tusks, and so Wally said to the hunter, "That's your guy. That's the one you should aim for. But make absolutely sure that you shoot him right there in between the eyes. That's the only thing that'll do it." And of course, I'm got my camera. Now, this is the days of film. 1,000 feet magazine of film. The camera is heavy. There's a black man helping me carrying the battery, which was a Wetzel battery. It was a big deal. It was a lot of stuff to cart around the African bush, And here I am with the camera, and so I positioned myself right behind the hunter, and behind me was Wally, the white guide, with his rifle, but in front of me was the man about to take the shot, and I wanted to get a shot looking over his shoulder when he shot the elephant. That's the best angle to get coverage of the scene. And he shot, and he missed. But the herd panicked. And the minute that happened, the herd began to scatter. There was terror amongst them. And there were a few cows, female elephants with babies. And there was one cow who had a small baby, probably a teenage, equivalent. Not a tiny baby, but a half-grown elephant. And she decided to charge us. She decided to come galloping towards us to charge us because her baby was in peril, and she knew that. And so I'm running, I've got my camera running right behind the hunter, and Wally yells at him from behind me, "Shoot her," because she's running towards us.
Yeah.
And he took aim, and he shot, but missed.
Right.
And he ran away. But I'm standing there with an empty frame, except this big elephant getting bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger in my frame, running towards me. The earthquake of the ground was shaking, and I'm a dead man. And Wally said, "Run!" But I was frozen, but I kept running.
Yeah.
And she must have been 6 to 8 feet away from me when I heard this bam behind me as Wally shot her right between the eyes like this. And I sort of dropped my camera, but I kept running film. and she looked at me, and her eyes started to glaze over, and she fell down on her forelegs, her front legs buckled, and then she fell on her side and died. It was a heart-stopping event, I can tell you. It was absolutely terrifying. But you know, when this happens, one thing you learn as a cameraman is get the shot. No matter what happens, even if your life's in danger, you don't stop filming. You carry on. You get the shot that you came to do. And it's only after that, when I turned off the camera and there's this poor dead cow lying in front of me, that I suddenly realized what happened. This animal would have killed me.
Yeah.
And it was not at that moment, but it was that night back at the main camp, when we were all sitting around drinking and sitting around the fire, when it suddenly hit me. This is what the Nganga saw. This is the great beast who will almost kill you in the bush. I was almost run over by an elephant that was charging to protect her baby. And she nearly killed me. But when that elephant died, and this may sound very, very strange, but I still stick to the story, no matter what. I think that she knew that I was not responsible for putting her life in danger, but she was running towards the hunter who ran away, and I was in her way, and she would have come for me. I don't think that she intended killing me, because as she collapsed and her eyes were locked on mine, I didn't feel any animosity from her, and I didn't feel any threat from her, but of course I was terrified.
Yeah.
I felt as though she and I made a connection.
Yeah.
And that her spirit, somehow or another, I don't even know how to explain this because it sounds completely wild.
Yeah.
I think that her spirit almost joined with mine for that moment when she died.
Yeah.
And I'll tell you why I say that is because many, many times in many occasions long after that, when I had my bones read by other Sangomas, they would often say to me, what is this Ndlovu? And Ndlovu is the Zulu word for elephant.
Mm-hmm.
They would say, what is this Ndlovu that you have with you? As though the spirit of that animal had stayed with me all my life. And I believe it has.
Yeah.
Because they saw it in the bones. These are very, very powerful people. These people are connected to a realm that you and I don't understand.
Mm.
And they could see this, that the spirit of that elephant has been with me throughout my life. It's been told time and time again, at least 6 or 7 occasions. Sangomas have thrown bones for me and have said, you have an Ndlovu around. You have an elephant with you. And I know it's that poor cow that was shot in front of me that day.
What in the Sangomos?
Sangoma, yeah.
Sangoma. What's their perception? What's their take on if they detect or they feel there's an animal spirit with you? From their viewpoint, what's happening there? Is it like a kind of a protective guide or what really? Sorry.
Well, I'm not quite sure what you're asking me. You're asking, do you mean does an animal? Oh, I see what you're saying.
Yeah,
okay, so when they read about the animal with me, is that what you're asking? Do they see it as a protective guide?
Yeah.
They never labeled it as such.
Okay.
But I believe it to be so.
Yeah.
I believe that she has joined me as a protective entity, a protective guide. She's one of many, and I believe I have many, as I think we all do.
Mm.
We have guides, and we have spirits, and we have protective entities around us, and I think the elephant is one of them. But none of them actually ever said that to me in those words,
Yeah.
That's what you're asking.
It was just something they picked up and they said, you've got this spirit with you, okay.
You've got the spirit, you've got the spirit of the Ndlovu around you. They've never said it's harmful or it's not harmful or it's protective. It's just that she's there. Go figure, she's there.
Yeah. No.
Um, and I know that she's there because it's been proven to me time and time again. I mean, I've been there with anthropologists and with people who really understand the Sangomas way better than I do. And they said, that's very interesting that they say that. And then I tell them the story and they say, oh, well, that's what it is. She's still with you. That elephant is still with you.
Yeah.
Because many, many years later, in the 70s, this is in South Africa again, I did a series of programs for television called The Tribal Identity. Now, when television eventually came to South Africa, and it took a long time for it to arrive, because heaven forbid anybody should see how the rest of the world lives, so it was kept away for as long as possible.
Yeah.
But you can't hold back progress. And in 1976, television eventually arrived. But we were making programs for television before that. So in 1974 or 75, I was given a fabulous series of shows to do, a series called The Tribal Identity, which examined the main tribal groups of Southern Africa. And the purpose of this was to basically introduce white audiences to their black neighbors. They knew nothing about these people's culture.
Yeah.
And no one was interested. We were not taught any black languages at school. We were not taught any black culture at school. As far as, when you were educated, the black man was portrayed as an inferior individual who ran around in grass skirts and beat drums, and wore rattles and beads. That's all we were taught. But in terms of their culture, their rich history, and the fact that there were empires and kingdoms and all the rest of it before the white man arrived, that was never given to us at school. So when I was given this series, I wanted to talk about some of these things. I wanted to explain to white viewers that, that your black neighbors has a sophisticated history. Up until that point, the black man had no history in Africa as far as the whites were concerned. History in South Africa began with the arrival of the Dutch in 1652, when they came to the Cape of Good Hope to set up a halfway station on the sea route between Europe and the West Indies.
Yeah.
Other than that, there was no history. It was all white history. There was no black history that was of any degree of substance worth teaching at school. And I wanted to correct this when I was given the series. And so I did this series of shows. I think there were 6 or 8 of them. And in those shows, I also dealt with African religion is the wrong word, because, with the indigenous tribes, and I think this applies still today, even to many of the black groups who live in the cities. They're many of them are Christian, of course, but if they belong to the animist or the tribal groups, the idea of religion as we know it is not the way they see it at all. It's about connection with the ancestors, and there is no direct connection to a god, although there is a word for God. And Nkosinkulu is one of the words they would use for God, a superior being, a divine being above us all. But the only way to reach that entity or that power is through the ancestral spirits. Okay. So most of it is all about connecting with the ancestors. And I don't mean this in any disparaging way at all, because I think it's a very lovely way of being able to connect with your past your ancestors, and let them be the conduit to whatever it is that you're trying to reach. And so, we try to portray this. And so I was exposed to a lot of Sangomas during the making of that series. But later on, as I explain in the book, after I developed a rather horrible kidney disease, I went back to South Africa many times, and I saw a lot of Sangomas in an attempt to try and find some degree of healing. Yeah, I live in LA, where some of the best doctors and hospitals in the world exist, but my life was under threat because of this kidney illness that I had developed. I had my immune system had turned against my kidneys when I was trying to destroy my kidneys, and I had a very wonderful nephrologist here in LA, and he did what he could to help me deal with the illness. But I had a friend, I still have a friend, who lives up the road in Santa Barbara, who's also South African, also white, but he studied the shamans, the Sangomas in South Africa, and learned their ways, and almost became ordained in the way of the African Sangoma. I tell his story in the book as well. It's an amazing tale. And so he's a surgeon, by the way. He's a surgeon. And one day he said to me, you've got this kidney deal going on with you. You're seeing all these great doctors. That's good. But you know what? I'm going back to learn from my Sangoma teacher who lived in Swaziland. Yeah. Why don't you come with me? Maybe we'll find someone there who can help you. I said, Dave, you're a surgeon. And you telling me that I must go back and see a witch doctor to help me? Because that was still the term most people used for these people. And he said, yes, that's exactly what I'm telling you to do. Yeah. And I did. So I went back many times. And I think that it was because of my consultations with a lot of these Sangomas that I met in South Africa that I have managed to survive this disease. They were all amazing people, extraordinarily helpful.
How would they give people kind of an idea when you go to, obviously when we get a recommendation, go and see this guy in this village or this lady in this village, what way, if you can explain, how would they treat you? What way would they address the situation? Or
well, what was the most amazing aspect of it is that they all, I didn't tell them anything about my illness. And the very first time I went to consult a Sangoma about this, the bones were thrown, was a woman. And she said, yeah, you have problems with your inside organs and it is your kidneys. She foresaw, she could tell that it was my kidneys. And so, I was given little bits of powder and herbs and whatever else to mix with water to drink. I was given amulets to carry, wear around my neck or put under my pillow. All sorts of things. So that was the treatment they offered. But when I went to Swaziland to meet this Sangoma, who was teaching my surgeon friend the craft of the African Sangoma, he threw the bones for me and he said, you are a very sick man, and you need special treatment. And I have someone in mind who may well be able to help you. And I said, like what? And he said, well, I'll introduce him to you tomorrow. Now, his little settlement, or his kraal, as they call it, or his little compound, if you like, in the bush, was not far from Manzini in Swaziland, which today, by the way, is called Eswatini. They've changed the name of the country. Okay. Swaziland used to be a British protectorate. It got its independence in the 60s. It retained the name Swaziland, but it was renamed a few years ago to Eswatini, which is the Swazi name. Swazi, by the way, is one of the Nguni languages, very closely related to Zulu. And so we were there at this man's compound. The teacher of my surgeon friend, his name was Mchauli, and he said that he had someone who may be able to help me with my illness. And I said, what could he do? And he said, well, we'll go and meet him tomorrow in town. He's coming. He usually gets his supplies on a Thursday from the trading store. We'll go and meet him. And we did. We went there, and there was this short little guy, maybe 5 feet tall, spoke no English, spoke only Swazi. And I was introduced to him, and he was very meek and very, very mild. And he was very very respectful of me, respectful towards me, almost to an embarrassing degree. And but I met him, and it was agreed that we would go to his kraal on a certain night, maybe 3 or 4 days after that, and he would perform what was called a femba. When I heard the word, I thought, what on earth is that? Sounds terrifying. Straight out of Indiana Jones and the what is a femba?
Femba, yeah.
Anyway.
And it's like for anyone watching the Femba ritual, it's like an exorcism. Is that right?
That's exactly what it was. It was an exorcism, yes. And I didn't know that, but as it was explained to me by Charlie, he said he will get rid of the bad spirits. Well, that's like an exorcism.
Yeah.
So came the time to meet him. We drove 3 or 4 hours through the bush, little dirt tracks up into the mountains, absolutely glorious, magnificent geography, just beautiful, unbelievably visually startling place. And his little kraal was right up on the top of the mountains, and over the mountains on the other side was Mozambique. This side was South Africa, and here was Swaziland. It was gorgeous. We arrived there just before nightfall, and I was welcomed into this hut. I didn't see him, but my friend was with me, and there were a couple of other people, plus the driver of our vehicle. And we went into this very large hut, a circular hut, grass thatched roof, and it was full of women. Now, I don't know whether they were this man's wives or whether they were people from the surrounding areas. You never really know in Africa. There's always a mystery, and there are always unanswered questions. You never really know what's really going on, which is part of the charm of the place. I mean, it's always a surprise, and you always are surprised by things that happen that you don't expect. And here was this huge hut with all of these women beating drums. And some of them had babies on their backs, and some of them had little kids playing at their feet. Very few men, in fact, none, just all of them were women. But I was met by 2 young guys who I was told were the sons of this man that I'd met in town, who was going to perform the Femba. And they took me into this hut, and I sat down. And in the middle of the hut, there was a pole, and right next to that was a fireplace. The pole was holding up the grass roof. It was a big hut. And there was this fire. I was told to strip right down to my underwear, which I did. And I didn't even feel embarrassed at all in front of all these women, because the whole thing was like, this is out of a science fiction film. I was living the life of Indiana Jones, I really was. And I sat there, and the fire was crackling in the middle, and the drumming was going on, and it was going on and on and on for about a half an hour. And I thought, what's going to happen? What am I doing here? Sitting in my underwear. And then suddenly at the far end of the hut, a door opens, and there was this guy that I'd met in town a few days earlier, but now he was in his full Sangoma regalia. Beads, grass skirt, rattles around his ankles, and his eyes were huge and bloodshot. And I thought, what's the guy been smoking, or what's he been doing, Yeah. But it wasn't that at all. He'd been taken over by it. It was almost as though he was possessed, because as he came into the room, he went, yeah, and the drumming stopped instantly, and there was silence, and all you could hear was the crackling of the fire, and this guy standing there staring at me with these big bloodshot eyes. And he dropped down onto all fours, on hands and knees, and he started to creep towards me. The only thing I can think of is that he had become a hyena. The way he moved and the way he walked and his body movements reminded me, and these arched back up like this, and the snorting, he was, it was like a hyena. It's like a hyena spirit had overtaken the guy's, over the guy's body. Yeah. I had no idea what to expect, but I was petrified. I was really scared, because this is a very, very, I had no understanding of what was going on at all. And he came right up to me, and he started to smell my body all the way from my feet, up my legs, all the way up to my midriff. And when he got to the left side of my body, he got to the area where my kidney was, he started to wanted to be sick. Right. Okay. And these 2 young guys that had met me originally came running up to him, holding a barrel, and he breathed in exactly where my kidney was. And he had no idea that I had a kidney complaint. Yeah. Breathed in, sucking in the air from my body and retching into these barrels of this vile, foul, yellow liquid that he vomited up. I mean, it was pretty ugly. I thought, this is, I had no idea what was going on, but it's like he was taking on my illness. And
drawing the poison or the illness.
Yeah, exactly, out of my body and retching it into these barrels. And then he went up to my head and he smelt my, when he got to my ears and I could hear this deep breathing, it was like having a wild animal right in my face. And then he went down, and when he got to the right-hand side of my body, to where the kidney was again, the same thing started to happen. He started to heave. And he got sick into the barrel again. I don't know where it all came from, but it like endlessly, this foul, liquidy stuff. And then he went down and he stood at my feet, and he got up like this, and he made a pronouncement. I don't know what it was. It was in Swazi. I learned later what it meant after it was all over, but he was speaking to me. He was talking to me. And later on, I was told what this was, and I can tell you what that meant, what that was in a minute. And then he stood up and he left the room, and the drumming started again. And I felt completely drained. I felt as though my heart had gone down to its lowest level. My blood pressure had obviously gone very low because I felt terribly lightheaded. I got up, they helped me back. I got dressed, we got back on the Land Rover. We drove back to to Charlie's place. And it was explained to me by a guy in the car. What this man had told me was, your grandfather came there tonight. My grandfather I'd never met on my father's side. My father was originally from Latvia.
Okay.
And he immigrated to Africa in his 20s. So I had never met my grandfather. My grandfather had been deceased for, decades. But what this man had told me was that my grandfather had come to him that night and had helped to show him where my illness was. And so the vomiting and all of it was he had exorcised the evil, the darkness, the negativity, the illness, if you like, out of my body, and that my grandfather would protect me if I used a walking stick every time I went for a walk. I should think of him, and he will always protect me.
Okay.
And the walking stick must be made of a certain type of tree that only grows in this area in Swaziland. I mean, these are the things that are told to me that night in the vehicle driving back. And the next morning, Charlie, who's the man whose kraal we're staying at, he wasn't with us that night, by the way.
Mm-hmm.
And there were no cell phones or faxes or anything connecting the two places. But the next morning, he said to me, well, you had an interesting night last night, didn't you? As though he was there. He knew. He virtually described what had happened to me. And he said, come into my hut. And I go into his hut and I sit down with him, and he throws the bones again. And he says, yes, you need a walking stick, which is exactly what that man had told me the night before. And he reached into the shadows behind him in his hut, and he brings out the stick. And he said, I carved this 2 weeks ago because I knew I would need it for somebody. And it's for you. And it was made of exactly the type of timber, wood, that I was told to get.
Yeah.
And he said, you take this, and every time you go for a walk, your grandfather will protect you and will keep you well and will keep your kidneys going. It will keep you going. I go nowhere. This is 20 years ago now when this happened, by the way. I go nowhere without that walking stick. If I go for a walk, if I walk around the block, if I go wherever it is, that stick comes with me.
Goes everywhere. Yeah.
I really do believe that maybe my grandfather's spirit is around and giving me protection. So that's just, that was just an extraordinary,
Yes, definitely.
and I do believe that something was removed from my body that night, because I've had this illness now for since 1996. It's a long, long time. Yeah. I should have been in dialysis already or dead, but I'm not. I'm still around. Yeah. And I know that I've some kind of cure of some form or another, obviously with Western medication and the allopathic healing, but I'm absolutely convinced that together with the Sangomas that I've met and that particular night, it's all played a role in keeping me alive.
Because when I was preparing for this interview, when you got the diagnosis for the issue of your kidneys, I think you remember you were saying that you were asked the doctors about this, and the doctors didn't know what was causing the issue with your kidneys, and you asked, what's the what's the end game of this? And they said dialysis.
Yes.
Uh, could you explain a bit more about? Now we're kind of going back a bit, but could you explain a bit more about what the doctors told you? Because it maybe gives a bit more insight into illness.
Yeah, well, one of the things that when I was diagnosed with this illness, you know, my nephrologist said to me, I had a biopsy, and he said, you've got this condition with your kidney. It's idiopathic, which basically means we don't know what's causing it, but it's your immune system that's turning against you for whatever reason. I have theories about what may be causing it, but that's maybe for another time. But he said to me, as we don't know what brought this on, were you ever stung by some poisonous insect? Because maybe there's some toxin in your bloodstream that's been lying there dormant for years and years, and it's suddenly been triggered. Or did anything happen to you? Were you bitten by a scorpion or a spider? I said, look, I spent most of my life in Africa. Yes, all of those things happened to me. I got bitten. I even got bitten by a baboon once in my leg, and I had blood poisoning, and I was laid up for weeks. All of those things happened to me, and I've swum in dirty rivers, and I've drunk filthy water, and I even smoked elephant dung when I ran out of tobacco in the bush once. I've done all these weird things. Of course, I lived in Africa. The only thing that never happened to me, I was never bitten by a snake. But all of those things happened to me. So maybe, you see, well, it could, maybe it's that. Maybe that's what caused it, but we have no idea what brought this on. And I said, well, neither do I, but all the questions you asked me, did you get stung? Did you get bitten? All of those things. Yes, of course. All of those things happen to you when you run around the bush and the jungles of Africa. Of course, those things happen, and they did. And so, is that what caused my illness? To this day, we do not know, but my immune system suddenly decided it's time to turn against my kidneys. And, it was either going to be dialysis or death. And, and yet here I am still, to tell the tale, still drinking very unhealthy drinks like this caffeine drink here.
Yeah.
And I carry on,
Excellent. Lionel, obviously you've done films and shows. Your career spans 50 years, isn't that right?
Yeah.
Over 50 years. You interviewed Hans Baur in 1983, and this also ties in with your book and predictions made by the Nganga.
Yes.
For anyone who's watching, Hans Baur was Adolf Hitler's personal pilot. And could you tell us about that, and what was that like, interviewing someone who obviously, I'm assuming, had spent quite a lot of time in close proximity to Hitler? What was? I'm sure that was unreal.
Jonathan, I mean, to this day, I still don't. It's hard to put it all together. That I actually experienced it. I mean, I just say one thing. I have been blessed. I don't want to sound in any way arrogant or boastful, but I've had an amazing career. I've been blessed with the opportunity to do extraordinary things, and been exposed to amazing things and met really fascinating people all my life. It's been absolutely marvelous, and I'm extremely grateful for my career. But this is one of those unusual ones, and this is one of those events that this woman had foreseen. The Nganga said to me during that first reading way back in 1964, she said, and these are her words. I didn't know what she was talking about, but she said to David, my interpreter, she said, "You tell him that one day, the day will come, he will do lots of traveling, he will meet lots of people in many places, but the day will come when he will meet a man," and the African way of saying, if you're close to something, they put up their fingers like this, you're close, right? Mm-hmm. And she put up her hand like this. He will meet a man who was very close to the most evil man who ever lived.
Yeah.
What on earth is she talking about? Right? And I made notes. I kept some of the notes, but I mean, those are the things that remain in your head, you know. So she says he will meet a man who was close to one of the most evil men who ever lived. What on earth is she talking about? So we have to fast forward now to the year 1983. And I'm doing a series of documentary films on the history of South African Airways. Now, the history of South African Airways and Imperial Airways, which was the forerunner of British Airways, their histories are very closely aligned. And during the 30s, Britain had a need for creating air links with its outlying outposts of the empire, of which South Africa was one, and Australia and India and so on. And to develop air links down to South Africa was a huge deal. There were no airfields and airports down Africa, weather reporting stations and all this. It didn't exist. And it was a huge monumental effort to get that process underway. But it was done. And air links were eventually forged between Croydon and Johannesburg, which eventually South African Airways became a partner in that route, linking the UK with South Africa. And one of the events that was part of the South African Airways story, which really began in 1929, was in 1934, the airline ran out of, it was privately owned. The airline ran out of money. The government took it over, changed the logo of the airline and changed the branding of it and ordered from a factory in Germany, the Junkers factory, new aircraft called the Ju-52. Now, anybody who knows anything about aviation knows that the Ju-52 is a classic airliner of the 30s, a metal skin, 3 engines, one in the nose, one on each wing, fabulous aircraft. They were absolutely amazingly endured with wonderful engines. And, so 3 of these were ordered for the fleet of South African Airways. Now, how do you deliver them from the factory, which, if I'm correct, I think was in Bremen at the time, all the way to Johannesburg, flying down through darkest Africa? Well, it was a huge expedition to arrange fuel and stopovers and all this. So we tell the story in the documentaries. And while I was working on on these shows and getting the stories in order, my researcher, a wonderful lady by the name of Esme Jacobson, who was my researcher at the time, she found out that one of the pilots was still alive who flew one of those aircraft on that delivery flight, those delivery flights. And when I heard this, I thought, we have to interview this guy. Is he compos mentis? He's still got all these marbles. Can I talk to him? He was in his late 80s, I believe, but he had retired in Germany. And so we put the mechanisms into working and got the machines and the wheels going. So with the airline and with the television network and with the South African embassy in Germany and whatever else, it was found out that this man, yes, lived in this little town called Ammersee near Munich. His name was Hans Baur. And not only that, but he was a 16 millimeter fanatic. He loved shooting movies. And he did a film of the delivery flight. So his delivery flight was in 1936. And he covered the whole thing on film, on 16 millimeter film. And that film was in a vault in Frankfurt. And I thought, oh, this is marvelous. I can put this into the documentary. So anyway, to cut a very, very long story short, my crew and I, we eventually arrive in Frankfurt. The production is now underway for these documentaries. And we find the film, we select parts of it. He was a pretty good cameraman for a pilot. I mean, his stuff was excellent. Shots of people in tribal dress pouring cans of paraffin into the wings of these aircraft. So with wild animals in the background. I mean, it's just gorgeous stuff. And he got coverage of all of this. So we could use some of that in the film. And now we're in Frankfurt, and we had to go down to this little town near Munich to interview him. And while it was being arranged for us to do that, so it's a straight autobahn drive from Frankfurt down to Munich, on those wonderful, amazing German autobahns, no speed limit, fabulous. And I think there were 2 vans on the day we left Frankfurt to go down to Munich. But the day before we left, a man arrived, and this is before East Germany and West Germany combined, but before the fall of the Berlin Wall. So they were still 2 separate countries. East Germany was still part of the Soviet bloc, and West Germany was separate. And so the government at that time the German government was based in Bonn, not in Berlin. And a guy from the German government from Bonn arrives at the office in Frankfurt. And he's going to accompany us. And I thought, well, why is he doing this? And I asked one of the local people who worked for the airline, and they said, oh, no, he's only here to make sure everything goes smoothly. You are guests now, you're in Germany. He wants to make sure that everything goes smoothly and all the rest of it. He will accompany us. And I said, that's fine. Anyway, so we all go, the crew and the man from Bonn, and a couple of the other people, executives from the airline and whatever else, and we're driving down. So the night before we do the interview, we're staying at a very small hotel. We've reached this town, and we're staying at a very small hotel, and lots of very nice, good German Rhine wine was consumed. And the man from Bonn spoke perfect English, and I'm glad of that, because he said, I will be your interpreter for your questions, because Kapitan Baur, as he referred to him, speaks no English, only German. I will translate all your questions when you do the interview. I thought, that's great, wonderful. Yeah. So as the night wore on, he sort of was hinting to me. He said, well, how much do you really know about Kapitan Baur, his background? I said, well, I know that he was on that delivery flight. And he said, yeah, but in addition to that, do you know what else he did? And I said, well, I have no idea. I said, probably during the war, he must have flown for the Luftwaffe, because he was obviously, if he'd flown in 1936, the delivery flight, he must have been a pilot during the war. And so the guy said, yep, but do not discuss the war with him. No discussion of the war. I said, no, I'm not. That's not the purpose of the interview. My interview is about the delivery flight in 1936. Don't worry about a thing. I won't ask him anything about the war. Good. And anyway, so the next day we all arrive at this picture book house with, hollyhocks outside, neat garden path. And we are met by his 3rd wife. Apparently it was his 3rd wife, I believe, which I learned later. She welcomed us into his house. And I was told again by the man from Bonn that Kapitan Baur has got some war wounds, and he said he's got a bad leg. So be gentle with him, and he's late like 89. Be nice to him. I said, of course I will. So we go inside, we're welcomed inside by his wife, and we sit down in the lounge, the living room, and I hear clunk, clunk, clunk coming down the stairs. And there comes this short little guy, gray hair, with a walking stick, and he's got a bad leg, he's got a gummy leg. So I thought, well, that must be the war industry injury that they're talking about. He comes and we meet him. He meets us. I have forgotten to tell you one key thing, and that is the night before, just before midnight, when I was talking to this man from Bonn, he says to me, but the real truth about Hans Baur, which you will not discuss, is the fact that he was the personal pilot of Adolf Hitler. Right. Well, you could have blown me over with a feather. I mean, how often does that happen?
Yeah, that's worth talking about.
And I said, I was absolutely startled. I didn't know what to say. And I said, oh my God, really? He said, yeah, but you promised me you wouldn't discuss the war. Do not discuss it. And you don't discuss anything about what I've told you. So I said, no, I won't. I promise I won't. But, when I met the guy and he came down the staircase, that was the first thing in my mind. This was Adolf Hitler's personal pilot. What does that mean anyway? Well, I didn't grasp what that meant. What does it mean, Hitler's personal pilot? So Hitler must have used flown around at various times. Was this the only guy who did it? Is that what they meant? I didn't know. Anyway, we set up, we put the lights up, got the sound recording going. We did the interview. This man did the translating. I got the whole story about the flight down Africa and on and on. And at the end of it, I said to him, "Thank you very much. Danke. Das ist fertig. We are done." And so Captain gets up, takes his cane, and he says to his wife, "Senta, bring on the schnapps, bring on the drinks, time to drink."
Yeah.
And I felt very relieved that it was over. I got through this. The man from Bonn, however, was even more relieved than me because we hadn't discussed the war. And I could see his shoulders go down and he breathed a sigh of relief. But on the wall, there were some pictures. And one of the pictures was a picture of him. It was around the corner on the way to the bathroom, to the toilet. A picture of him with Hitler outside an aircraft where he was wearing his official, uniform. And when the drinks arrived, we started to drink, and he says to me in German, now I have enough knowledge of German to know what he's talking about. He says to me in German, he said, you want to know about these pictures? And the man from Bonn goes like this. Here we go. And I said, "Ja, bitte, I would like to know." And he says to his wife, "Bring the photograph albums."
Yeah.
She brought out these big leather-bound photograph albums. Yeah. I sat with him on the couch, and we started from album 1 and went through all of them one by one. It's the entire history of Adolf Hitler and the Third Reich and all of those Nazi henchmen who basically changed the world. And I'm sitting next to the man who he tells me that when Hitler when he was campaigning to become Chancellor of Germany in 1933, he was chosen. He was chosen. He was a pilot for Hansa airline, that he was given to Luftwaffe to be the personal pilot for Hitler, to fly him around on his campaign trail. And when Hitler became Chancellor of Germany, Hitler would fly with no one else except this guy. And it turns out, he tells me, that Hitler and he were the closest of buddies. They were the closest of friends. When he had his first marriage, his first wedding in Munich, Hitler gave him his wedding party in his apartment in Munich. And they remained like that woman showed me, like this, ever since.
Yeah.
He was with Hitler in the bunker the night that Hitler took his life. And Hitler pleaded with him to leave. And he said, no. You see, he wanted to save Hitler.
Yeah.
Because he said, this man was so good to me and my family. I wanted to save the guy. I didn't discuss the war. Yeah. I didn't discuss the Holocaust. I didn't discuss any of that stuff. Yeah. But he offered to me all this information about him and Adolf Hitler. And there were pictures of Goering and Goebbels and this one and all the Nazi, the whole hierarchy. Pictures of him sitting dining at tables, official dinners, Mussolini and Hitler together. And at the end of the table, there was Hans Baur. Always. He was always there.
Yeah.
This man tells me his entire life story. And, he was one handshake away from probably what was one of the most evil men who ever lived.
Definitely.
Right?
Yeah.
And, it was only after this incredible day was over and he exposed his whole life to me and told me the story. We were driving away and I looked back and there he was standing outside his house with his wife, waving, two little old people waving goodbye to us. It suddenly hit me like a ton of bricks. The Nganga saw this. I will meet the man who was that close to the most evil man who ever lived. She foresaw that incident in 1964, decades before it happened.
Yeah.
So what does one say about this?
Yeah.
Just spending time with a guy like Hans Baur, and he, by the way, he was a member of the SS, and he, everything you can imagine that if you want to find out about the inner workings of the whole of the Third Reich and what made Hitler tick, he was the guy to ask. They were obviously the closest of friends. And it was an amazing day. And I found him an absolutely sweet, gentle, polite man. I didn't see him as the enemy or as the, part and parcel of that whole war machine. I couldn't perceive of him that way. I saw him as a pilot
Yeah.
and as a human being, but he just happened to be one of the closest friends of one of the most evil men who ever lived. It was like meeting Genghis Khan's greatest buddy.
Fascinating. So that is truly fascinating. That's amazing. You've obviously done numerous interviews and stuff like that. What, if I can ask, what way would you normally, what way would you approach interviews? How do you go about preparing? Obviously, maybe meeting someone who's Hans Baur has got a dark past, or they have a bit of a dubious character, and you've been sent in to get their story.
Well, I think the most important thing always for me has to be respectful of the person that you're interviewing, no matter who or what they are. You have to respect them as being an individual. And you can never know enough of their backstory to know why they turned out to be who they were, or if they did bad things, or if they didn't, or even if they were wonderful people, scientists, or engineers who work. I interviewed all the engineers who built the Voyager space probes that went to Jupiter and Saturn, Uranus and Neptune. I did a retrospective of the Voyager show, and meeting those guys. So, you really don't know enough about the backstory of people, but you come to everybody with some degree of respect for who they are as an individual, no matter who they are. And you find out as much as you can about them, but don't be judgmental. We have no right to be judgmental. And I find this always works, whether it's politicians or whatever. I remember meeting Malcolm Muggeridge, who, was for a while infamous, but also very famous. He was a spy and whatever else, but he was a power on BBC in the 50s and 60s. He said to me, whenever I meet people, I don't know who they are, and so I just have to respect them. And I said, that's exactly what I do. And he said, well, as long as you do that, you'll always get a good interview out of people. And I find it always works, no matter who it is. If it's a 5-year-old child, or if it's Hans Baur, it doesn't matter who they are. You come with them with a degree of respect for their individuality, and everybody's human. And you never know enough about their story to be judgmental. Don't be judgmental about anybody or critical. That's not one's role. But the most wonderful thing is if people start opening up to you about things. And I've met people who had near-death experiences, and I've met children who've been brought back to life after having suffered clinical death. And if you allow them to have trust in you and feel confident with you, they will peel away their layers, and you'll get to the kernel of what makes them tick, and they'll tell you things. They really will. It's amazing, and it's a great privilege to be able to do that. Can you imagine? I mean, you interview people all the time.
Yeah.
So what it's like, and as long as you gain people's trust, they will give you what you want, and perhaps even more so if you're very, very lucky.
Yeah.
And it always works, doesn't it? When you like your demeanor is absolutely wonderful as an interviewer. You're polite, and you're all those things that it works. It allows people to open up and trust you.
Yeah, because I think that's missing. From my point of view, looking at the world today, I think that's missing. And I think you only have to go online now, and the way people are speaking to each other and attacking each other over silly things, it's horrendous. It's terrible.
It is.
If I know, obviously we're coming to the end of the interview, I just wanted to touch on this, and I hope you don't mind me bringing this subject up, because I find, again, I'm very curious about the world myself, and I find your story absolutely fascinating. There's a lot. Anyone watching this, there's a lot to Lionel. There's a lot that I actually haven't had time to add in. But I want to touch on this. And good to get your story of what happened, and also maybe your opinion of where we might be in a year or so's time. But if anyone's watched this, in the past year, the Pentagon, which is obviously the branch of the United States Defense, they released footage of UFOs or UAPs or unidentified aerial phenomenon. And this was footage that was released by the US Navy, and it was released on quite a large amount of newspapers and stuff like that. And recently, again, I'm watching this. This is the 4th of January. The United States signed off the COVID relief bill. And in this bill, obviously it deals with the current situation of COVID. It includes a 180-day countdown for the Pentagon to release, to make UFO disclosures to the United States Senate. Pretty much they have to divulge what they know or don't know to the United States Senate. Lionel, you had an experience while filming in Canada. Can you walk us through that, what you saw and what you filmed? And also good to get your kind of opinion on where we're going. There seems to be a kind of a shift where ones in power, ones in the government are now kind of having more of a softer, certainly kind of go, yeah, there is something we've been detecting something with regards to UFOs or the new term UAP.
Well, right in the news yesterday, I think it was a Harvard scientist who was reported that object that was seen. I think it was a year ago. That was reported to be a very cigar-shaped looking meteorite that came whizzing past the Earth. This is a Harvard scientist who, you don't sneer at people like that. He said that was probably an alien spacecraft, the wreckage of an alien spacecraft. That's his theory, and this was in the news yesterday. I think it was on the BBC, and I think all the main news wires carried it. It's a very, very strange looking object. It looks like a long cigar, but it looks like a rocky shape, but it has a sheen to it. It came past at quite a speed. I'm not sure how close to the Earth it was, but he's convinced that it was the wreckage of an alien spacecraft. Oh. Well, I'll tell you, I have no doubt whatsoever that we have been visited by beings. There's no way we can be alone. I mean, that is the most absurd notion to even think that we're alone in the universe. It's ridiculous to even nurture that thought. That's ridiculous. Have we been visited by aliens? I think so. Years ago, I did and I talk about this in the book a little bit as well. I did a documentary with Professor Raymond Dodd, who discovered the first Australopithecus africanus hominid fossil in Africa. And, and he wrote a book called Adventures with the Missing Link. And I did a biography of him. This was in the 60s. And, we were driving in the car back from one of these cave locations. And he said to me, we'll never find the missing link. There's probably something about it that we'll never find. You'll never see the exact sequence in the bones, in the fossil record, that clearly shows this is the way. There has to be more to it than that. And I said, what do you mean, Professor? He said, well, look, I don't know. I don't want to be outrageous, but I think we've been tampered with probably. We probably had our DNA tampered with, and we'll probably never find the real linking pieces that, make us who we are. A lot of people would disagree with that. And I think many, many paleontologists and scientists and anthropologists today will, say, what a lot of bunkum. That's nonsense. We will. But I don't think we will, because I think that we have probably had encounters with intergalactic beings, probably. And I see no reason why that shouldn't be the case. And maybe we've had our DNA meddled with. Who knows? Personally, and I belong to a number of groups that investigate these things, and we yak about this and we talk about this. It's all on Zoom now. We used to get together for regular dinners and whatever else and discuss these things. But UFOs, or unidentified aerial phenomena, is a reality. There's this great footage from the Nimitz that's been made public. There was this story revealed yesterday from Harvard. Is disclosure ever going to take place with the existing government or the incoming administration in this country under Joe Biden? I don't know. I would love it to be so. And I think the Russians have as much information as the Americans do, as much as I think the Chinese probably do. And there are wonderful stories, by the way, from England. I know Dick Pope, who was with the RAF, yes. And he was, who I'm talking about, probably, yeah, Dick Pope, yeah. And there's that incredible story I forget about RAF, the base where the UFO landed.
Vandalston Forest.
Yes, exactly. That's the one. Yes. So there are just too many stories and tales. And I met one of the children, by the way, who encountered a UFO in Zimbabwe a couple of decades ago. There was this school, a very, very upper class private school, black and white children. Their parents could afford to send them there, and it's out in the countryside. And a UFO landed right next to the school in the middle of the boondocks, and the kids went out to find it. And they encountered these beings. These were probably the greys or whites, as ufologists would call them. And most ufologists think that those are drones, by the way, not necessarily the aliens that we're talking about, but probably creations of a far more superior species. That those may be, drones or
like an advanced version of what we send. We send machines to Mars. It's almost like that in a way. It's like a sit back and send a probe out kind of.
Exactly.
Is that right?
Yeah. But anyway, to get back to your story, in 1966, I was working with the National Film Board of Canada, and we were doing a documentary on the history of housing. Now, Canada's huge, right? It's an enormous country, as we all know, and how housing developed in certain areas, particularly in the plains and in the western areas and so on, is quite a saga. And so we were doing a documentary about that, and we were in the province of Saskatchewan, and there were only 3 of us in the crew. And we were staying in a motel, and the story centered around a potash plant. Now, potash was a potash mine that mined potash. Now, I have to be honest, I don't quite remember what potash is. It's whether it's fossilized material or whether it's natural. But anyway, they were mining potash, and they use it for fertilizer and various things like that. And it's white dust that it creates when they dig it out of the ground. And so we were staying at this motel, and we had to go to the potash plant to interview the manager of it, and then do some shots around the plant, and then look at the town that was developing around it, to give that as an example of how settlements, begin and then grow. This is 1966. So in the morning, we left our motel, the 3 of us, and we were driving towards the potash plant. And Saskatchewan in this part of the world is absolutely flat, like a drafts board, completely flat. And you could see miles and miles away the white dust coming from this potash plant. And up above it was this sort of cloud, which I think was just dust sitting in the atmosphere. And you drive and drive and drive and drive forever on a long straight road towards the plant. Anyway, when we eventually got to the gates of this plant, the guard at the gate says, "You guys are just in time, because there's something up in that cloud up there." "Really? What?" And he said, "We don't know, but it's up there. Something's up there." I said, "Okay." So we drove down to where the buildings were and the office was, and my other 2 members of the crew went to meet the manager and all this. I set up the camera. We're shooting 16 millimeter, not 35 millimeter, 16 millimeter film. And the longest lens we had, I think, was like a 300 millimeter. Maybe it was a 600. No, I don't think it was. It was probably a 300 millimeter. And I said, "I'll stay here in the parking lot and see if I can see what they're talking about. Anything in the cloud." Set up the camera. A few people sauntered over to me. One guy smoking away said, "Yeah, there's something up there. Don't know what it is, but it's up there." So I put the camera, trained it on the cloud, and we were just yakking away, talking. And a little breeze came up. And this guy with me, he said, "Oh, look, there it is." Because as this breeze came up, the cloud sort of dissipated, and there was this glint of something metallic.
Yeah.
And I trained the camera, I found it and focused on, and it cleared, and there was this disc. It was a huge disc, and underneath it was like a triangle, connected with a tripod to the disc, just sitting there. Now, everybody always wants to know the size. Now, this was before the days of the 747 jumbo jet, but that was the size of this object. It was at least that size, I'm guessing, because I know I was using a 300 mm lens. I guessed how high that cloud was. It must have been in that size, and it was just sitting there.
Yeah.
And I ran film. And I must have shot about, I don't know, 150 feet. Nothing happened. It just was this object.
Yeah.
And then eventually, it got covered up by cloud again, and I stopped running. Then the other two guys came running out, and then we had to get on with our work. So we shot for the rest of the day. But when I canned up the film that night to send to the lab, I removed that part, canned it up into a separate can to send to the lab in Quebec, in Montreal. And I said on the label and on the report sheet, please hold for our arrival. Process, but hold for our arrival. Don't do anything, just keep it. And, like 2 or 3 weeks later, we finished our location shoot, and we go back to Montreal. And now it takes a long, long time for us to look at all the dailies, all the rushes that we'd shot on the trip. So it's the three of us sitting there with the head of the camera department and a couple of other people. I don't remember exactly who they were, but these were obviously experts to do with the subject matter of the film. And we were looking at endless, boring reels of film of, housing estates and, new houses and buildings going up all over the Western provinces. And at the end of all of that, I said to the projectionist, have you got that other roll that I sent you? And the guy says, oh, yeah, you mean the one that said hold for your arrival? I said, yeah. I said, let's put it on. Let's see what it has. And so everyone stayed behind, remained in the theater. There were lots of little theaters at the National Film Board where you look at dailies or screenings. And we ran it, and it clear as a bell. There is this metallic looking, silvery colored aluminium, to speak proper English, object sitting in the cloud. It appears and then it's gone. But it was very clearly there.
Yeah.
And so the head of the camera department said, that's amazing. What is it? I said, none of us knew what it was. He said, we should send that to the States. They have this thing called Project Blue Book. They're collecting data on, is it a flying saucer? Who knows? Let's send it to them. So we sent it via a courier service to, I think they were based at, in Ohio.
Patterson.
I think Wright-Patterson in Ohio. Yeah. Yep, exactly. And we have a signature that they received the parcel and that they got the footage. And weeks go by, and, I worked on another little film. And one day I wandered into the camera department, and I said to the secretary of the camera department, Frankie Johnson was her name. I'll never forget. I don't know why I remember her name. I said, Frankie, whatever happened? Did we ever hear back from those guys in the States about that footage? Oh, no. She said, let me call them up and see what happened. And it's like, we're in Montreal time. Ohio is maybe 2 hours behind us or whatever. So she calls them up.
Yeah.
They denied ever receiving the footage.
Yeah.
The response was, oh, what film? Well, we have a signature on a piece of paper that they signed. They got it. And they denied having it. But it's there. And I wonder what happened to that footage. Now, the problem is, and here is the downfall of the whole of that story, was we were shooting on what is known as reversal film. And our reversal film is like shooting slides. Those days when we used to use film, you either shot on negative, which gave you a negative image, and then you made a positive print out of it, or you shot on reversal film, which gave you a positive image of what you shot. It's like shooting slides. For people who remember back to those antique days in the past when we used film. So we sent them the original. We didn't have the negative. We didn't send them a print. We sent them the camera original. Yeah. So we had no backup. We had nothing to prove that we had actually shot this damn thing. And to this day, and I'm sure those other two guys, I don't know what happened to them, regret not having made a copy of that and keeping a copy because they regret. So your question, will there ever be disclosure? I think the time must come when there has to be disclosure, because there has to be someone somewhere has to know a lot about this. Does the occupant of the White House know about it? I don't know.
Yeah.
But I think that the NSA, the National Security Association, I think probably the CIA, I would think probably that organizations like DARPA, which is the Research Institute for the Military here, would probably know more than the government really knows. But there are folks who know about the stuff. And when are they going to reveal that this is true. There's just too much evidence all the time that there are they from another world, another planet, another galaxy, another dimension, or another time? Or are they from the Earth, from a different time realm to where we are? We don't know.
Yeah.
But, you know, it's the exploration and the inquiry that's important. It could be all of those things.
Yeah.
And I think that if we are being visited by beings from another world, they're probably more than one species. They're probably lots.
Yeah. It's such a fascinating subject, and I think it's unfortunately, if it's brought up, people are almost embarrassed to bring that up for fear of judgment from others. And I think it as you said, it's not. There's stories out there that are so credible, multiple witnesses, people who have a lot to lose by making something up. Experienced pilots who've been maybe flying 30 odd years, that they know the plane like the back of their hand, and they've witnessed something. I think it's something I find it really fascinating, and hopefully with, I say, the demands of the COVID relief bill, maybe we're getting close to that goal line where they'll go, yes, this is what we've got, and maybe bring more people on board to investigate this.
There are probably more people investigating this than we know.
No.
I'm sure there must be, and I don't doubt that for a moment. But there's just too much evidence out there. And, you know, I'll tell you something very interesting. The Sun Bushmen people in the Kalahari Desert of south of what is now Namibia and Botswana talk about the people from the other world. And this guy that I went to South Africa with, this surgeon that I mentioned earlier, he's really interested in indigenous cultures, particularly African tribal groups. And he spent some time with the Sun Bushmen in the Kalahari. And one night he was sitting in the middle of nowhere, and they were doing a trance dance. They have the capability of going into a trance and seeing beyond the horizon, seeing into tomorrow, because it helps them in the hunt. Where will they find their prey?
Yeah.
Because they're nomadic people.
Yeah.
And he was sitting there one night, and he showed me this footage that he shot on film. He was filming them going around the fire, men only. The women do the drumming and the clapping. And suddenly the camera goes like this into the sky, and he said, "Oh, you know," and he showed me this footage, and he said, "Oh, that's when we saw the UFO." I'll fast forward through that, and I said, "Stop! What do you mean?" And he said, "Well, I was watching this. I was watching them dancing around the fire, and suddenly one person said, 'Look what's up there in the sky.' And so I pointed my camera up, and there's this disc glowing, sitting above us. It didn't come out on film terribly well, but I thought, no, I'm actually more interested in the fire. And I went back and he shot, and he kept filming. And he said, when I asked my guide what that was, the guide asked one of the Bushmen they speak click languages, so, you know, and this Sun Bushman said, "Oh, don't worry about them. Those are the people from the other world. They come all the time. It's like, you know, that's the 42 bus. Don't worry about it. It comes here regularly, you know." So even in cultures like that, where there's no track record of sci-fi or afternoon matinee movies of monsters from outer space, and they know, it's an accepted fact that there are beings from other worlds that are coming to the earth.
Yes.
The Aborigine people in Australia, the tribal people of Peru, and in the Amazon basin, you know, they all speak about this. And, you know, I've met Eric von Daniken a number of times, and obviously read everything that he ever wrote, you know, beginning with Chariots of the Gods and all the rest of it. And he's got tons of pictures and photographs of ruins all over the world showing objects. And then there's Jacques Vallee, who is a world authority on UFOs. And he published this incredible book called something about, I think, Mysteries of the Skies. And if you go back into the ancient past, right back to the time of the ancient Egyptians, on walls of the pyramids, you see images of discs in the sky. You know, you go back to medieval times. You go back to the 12th, 13th, 14th, 15th, 16th centuries, paintings showing stuff like this. It's been around forever.
Yeah.
And yet we still deny it. I mean, my youngest son, you know, said every time I talk about it, he said, "Oh, come on, Dad, you know, forget about it." You know, he thinks I'm a nut, but but it's happening.
Yeah.
We are being visited by what we don't know,
Yeah.
and I really wish that we would know. Probably somebody does know, and you know, there are stories. I've been up to Area 51. I went camping there. I wanted to see, maybe I could see something in the sky, and I believe that there, and also now in Utah, in an underground facility. How true it is, I don't know. I don't believe everything I hear. I'm not that gullible, but I'm open to considering all of these things. That they are reverse engineering spacecraft that have been found, or ones that have crashed, you know, going back to even pre-Roswell times, pre-1947. Spacecraft have been found. And where did LED lighting suddenly come out of? You know, where do we get the technology to suddenly come up with stuff like that? You know, I think that there is a degree of reverse engineering going on. And I think that maybe it's not in the commercial interest of the big corporations, particularly the fuel companies and the makers of transportation devices, to know that maybe we can tap into gravity waves. Maybe we can defy gravity. Maybe we don't need fuel to do that. That's not in their business interest. So keep it away. Don't tell them about it. That could be part of why there's so much secrecy. Is it a security threat? I doubt it. I think it's not a security threat, but you often are told, "Oh no, it's a security threat. Bring out the bombs, bring out the cannon, bring out the military." You know, I think that's all a lot of nonsense. Let's welcome these people, land on the White House lawn, and let's say hi.
Yeah. It would be probably one of the most significant events in history. The day that opens up, like that's it'll be like Eddie and BC and Eddie, like before or after. It'll be very, very significant.
That is the turning point in human, and it's the turning point in human history, because you know what it'll do for us. It's not so much the amazing or novelty of meeting alien beings, but to know that we aren't the center of all things.
Yeah.
And to give us a little bit of humility, and to give us a little bit of respect for the universe and the amazing nature of the cosmos, that we aren't the be all and end all of everything, that there's more out there. And it humbles us a little bit, and I think we can do with a little bit of that. You were talking earlier about, you know, just the way the media behaves and the way people behave in terms of political arguments. You know, decency and all dignity's gone out the window. We need to revive some of that, and I think that'll help us in that journey. You know, and to give us some respect for ourselves, and that there is more than just us.
Yeah, I think it would have the power. Hopefully, maybe I'm being an idealist here, but I'm hoping that once we get across that finish line, as a start line, that'll hopefully make us bring us closer together. Instead of all this divisiveness and
exactly.
The suspicion that we have for each other, and we don't trust this country and they don't trust us, and it'd be nice to kind of get beyond that.
It's about redeveloping respect for one another. That's what it's about, you know, respecting the next guy or the next being.
Yeah. Lionel, just to finish off, what would be one of the biggest lessons that you've learned in your incredible journey up to now?
I think I have to come back to this whole idea of respect. That there are so many mysteries to unfurl, and there are so many elements to every being, be it human or otherwise, that we don't know, and we need to be a little more respectful. And I think one of the major lessons, you know, that I, for myself, have learned is to respect all life, not just human life, but all life. And the way we treat the non-human world is just absolutely outrageous, particularly in our industrialized societies, with factory farming and all of these absolute horrors. And the truth of all of those things are kept away from us, because heaven forbid you should infringe on the number of hamburgers that are consumed if people really knew the truth. I think be respectful of your fellow beings, be respectful of your neighbors, be respectful of the universe. We're not alone, and there's so much to learn and still to get to know that. Come to it with a degree of humility and an open mind. I think the most important thing to have is an open mind and a questioning mind. Don't be gullible. Don't buy everything you hear. I mean, I hear so many conspiracy theories now about the COVID virus is man-made, being foisted upon us, and the vaccine is there to manipulate our DNA and, all these things. Don't be gullible. Listen to everybody and find out as much as you can, but keep an open mind about all things and do your own research. Just keep trying to find out more,
Yeah, keep learning, basically. Keep
learning. Yeah.
No.
Absolutely.
Lionel, thank you so much for coming on today. It was fantastic. It was really great to chat with you, and thank you for sharing your story. If people want to obviously access your work and especially the book, sorry, apologies.
It's Forever
in My Veins.
Yeah,
that's available in all. I'll be available in all bookshops, Amazon.
It's available right now on Amazon, and it's all the Waterstones, foils. They're all listing it already. Barnes and Noble, Amazon.com UK, Amazon.com in the US, everywhere it's listed. The book will be made available 2 weeks from now, but it can be ordered right now. So Forever in My Veins, and they can find it on Amazon. And if they want to find out more about it and read a little bit of the book, all they need to do is to go to my website, which is lionelfriedberg.com. And there's an excerpt in there of the book. And also they can order it from my website, taken straight to Amazon.
Excellent. And I on watch this. I've started reading the book your book recently in preparation for this. Definitely recommend it. And it's a fantastic book. It's very well written and it's great. It gives you great insight into a part of history, especially at the start of the book. You talk about South Africa and apartheid. It gives you kind of places you in your shoes and pretty much viewing that world through your eyes and giving people a bit of I think appreciation of how far we've came since those days, and hopefully we'll keep progressing as a species. Lionel, thank you so much, and again, hopefully you'll come back on again and we'll talk a bit more about some other subjects that you've covered in your work. So thank you.
I'd love to do that, Jonathan. Thank you so much, and thank you very much for having me. I really appreciate it, and thanks for everyone who watched this. I appreciate it. Appreciate the time with you.